What's up, everybody? Welcome back to HR Heretics. Today we have two old friends joining our segments, Colleen McCreary, David Hanrahan. Welcome back, team. Our friend Kelly Dragovich is somewhere on a beach drinking Mai Tais or Pina Coladas. I'm unsure what her drink of choice is, but she's definitely on a beach somewhere. So today we're going to continue the discussion around Scale's MEI policy. Colleen, David, I texted with each of you about this topic. Colleen, you actually dropped an article saying Merit needs a rebrand. And I actually would love to start there and talking about what is your take and why do you think Merit actually needs a rebrand?
Well, I'll correct you a little bit and say meritocracy in particular needs a rebrand. I think that's that word in particular. And maybe it's just because of merit gets pulled out of that. Some of it was certainly inspired by the MEI, Scale AI deciding to sort of put a stake in the ground, even creating a whole website around kicking up meritocracy again after, it's been, to some extent, kind of put to bed for a little while. I feel like we haven't actually heard that term sort of spinning in the era. I mean, that was a big term back in my Microsoft days, 25 plus years ago. Zynga, it was a big, value for us. And that was like 15 years ago. I mean, it's not like that's a new term at all, but it's got so much baggage. And you saw it, Nolan, you kind of threw it out there when you first saw it, not thinking it was going to be much of anything. And then I saw your post on LinkedIn and it was flood. I mean, you love a good flood of, lush attention. So for you, it was great. And I just felt like it's not, philosophically, I don't think it's a bad idea. I mean, in fact, I think a lot of us don't think the concept of finding the person who's the most qualified and rewarding the people who are the most qualified for doing, having the highest impact. I don't know a lot of people who would be opposed to that, but that word just sets people off in so many ways. And that's where I was like, it just needs a branding. I mean, it's just a bad brand at this point. So maybe we should think of a better word or a better term or a better way to go about it. And it could, and then figure out a better way to do it. And I also think that, in the article that I wrote, I was speaking of this, that it's not exactly meritocracy as a philosophy. We all kind of wrap our arms around and we do agree with. The philosophy isn't bad. It's the execution that is so fucking hard. And it's really, really hard to get right in the sense that every stakeholder can agree and align and believe that it's true. And that's where it seems to fall down in so many ways, or that people seem to have. And I think Kelly even spoke on this, at one of your other podcasts, that I think people have scar tissue, where they believed in the system, or they trusted that something was going to go right, or they believed that this was happening, and then they saw some example, or they felt like they got wronged or screwed, and that didn't happen. And then, so now they don't believe it anymore.
So I've been trying to learn and figure out where people have an issue, specifically with the term meritocracy. I think there is even some people who have an issue with the term merit. And what I've been hearing from folks is that it's hypocritical. It's like we say we do these things until the rubber meets the road. And then it feels like rules for thee, but not for me, for the very special people in the organization who get to operate on their own with impunity. David, is that why meritocracy has so many haters? Or what is your take on why meritocracy comes with the baggage that Colleen's talking about?
I think that's a lot of it. Kelly talked about the GitHub rug and why the rug was quietly brought out of the office. And I think when you start hey, meritocracy, as Colleen talked about, is an ideal, or it's an ethos of hey, isn't that a great ethos? But then you start breaking it down, referrals. We refer 30%. 30% of our hires are referrals. So someone literally knows someone, and that's how they got in, or they fast tracked through the interview process. Does that fly in the face of a meritocracy? We know that referrals are oftentimes really great hires, but did we cast a wide net and this is really the best person, or hey, we trust so and so let's hire that person. Obviously, there's plenty of instances as founding stories for companies where we knew someone. My parent worked in this industry and knows a lot of doctors or what have you. And, that's kind of how we got connected to investors. That's how we built our business we knew people versus the founder who's in the middle of nowhere, who doesn't have those connections and didn't get the same level of investment. So I think there's just so many instances where it falls apart. And so it's like, yeah, it's a great ideal, but we can't say this is us 100%. Like, we're going to strive for it. But we're not going to get 100%. And I think when you write something like Alexandr did, it kind of sounds like it's unimpeachable, like it's us 100%, and that's why people roll their eyes.
Well, and let's be real. I'm going to take a real life example today. Do you think that Ronnie James, if he wasn't LeBron James' son, would have been drafted by the Lakers, like based on his stats coming out of USC? Like, not everybody's a sports person, and I know that not everybody likes using sports analogies, but like that's today's news. And
yep.
I gotta tell you, like, I would not have predicted that if I just saw the stats of this athlete and that school and that record. I don't see that happening for that person going to the Lakers this year. Like
100%. Okay, so totally agree with you. I think what I'm hearing and learning from people is that the issue with meritocracy is that it's hypocritical and selectively applied. It's like, for the most part, this is what we want, except for these like edge cases, which happens to be my family or my friends or my people in some way, shape, or form. And then I want, I want the backdoor entry for those.
I just have selective memory of these kinds of things, right? Like, I can very strongly remember a CEO who thinks that he is as the most meritocratic person around, and we were doing layoffs. And when I present the layoff list and I show him some of the names, and he's like, we can't lay that person off. They're the most amazing engineer ever. And I was like, they were 3 years ago. And now they just get high half the day. Like, they don't work that hard anymore. Like, this person should be out, and so that refresh of what have you done for me lately, like we have people struggle to recalibrate on a regular basis, and what's your system to recalibrate, and how do we reapply that idea of what is merit and what is excellence, and sort of. It's hard. I mean, it's just really, that's why I go back to the systems and the process and all of these things to make sure that you're consistently, it's not just when you come in the door and how you get in the door, it's the continued nature of how do you reapply those things and make sure that they are appropriately being layered in, and that everybody sees it and can appreciate it and understand how those decisions are being made. Across the system that you have.
I think that's well said. Now, I'm a big believer in, hey, we should absolutely call out the problems with the system, but we should also be thinking about what are viable alternatives.
Totally.
And this is where, like, in our community and in people leaders and HR folks, I have been searching for a viable alternative. And I am not hearing from people what we should be striving for, if not meritocracy. And so I guess, like, David, kicking this over to you, what do you think we should be striving for? Should we be striving for meritocracy, or should we be striving for some other form of excellence and intelligence?
I think I'm going to quote Joel, and I think you both know the quote that, but for the listeners. Joel, upon hearing what Alexandr wrote, said that, he writes, for example, that hiring for MEI requires casting a wide net for talent and then objectively selecting the best without bias in any direction. That's exactly what the most effective DEI efforts are designed to do. So in terms of just finding an alternative, I don't know if you need to find an alternative, like, holocracy. I don't know, like what is an alternative to meritocracy? I think it's just a fancier term for what you do in terms of how corporations should run. And I think it's kind of it's putting a bow on something that I think many of us already believe. Like, I think proponents of DEI, those ardent supporters of DEI, said yes, you want to reward people for their merit. I asked Gemini, are meritocracy and DEI at odds with each other? And here's how Gemini says, think of an analogy. Imagine a race. Meritocracy ensures everyone has the same quality running shoes, i.e. skills and knowledge. DEI removes obstacles on the track, i.e. unequal access to resources, and provides training for everyone, i.e. development opportunities. This allows everyone to compete fairly based on their talent and effort. So I don't think you need to search for an alternative for meritocracy, because I don't think they're at odds with each other.
I think that's very fair. By the way, you're the only person I know that uses Gemini. Like, David, the rest of the world is on ChatGPT. So lay about Gemini. We're going to talk about this offline.
We're going to bring you back into the rest of the world.
It's like, where's this? Like, oh my God, we got to get him a lifeline. Colleen, do you agree with David, or do you think that there is potentially a different alternative here that we should be optimizing for?
I don't think David's wrong. I mean, I think that's a great path. You know, I think employees are going to, if you're thinking about this from a company building standpoint, my perspective is that I would create more, I would over communicate and be more transparent about what those processes are and how we would get there. And I think that is my default in general is to get there. And I would not overpromise that those things are true. And I think that's my struggle with that kind of statement, is I just think, and it's like saying we're going to be the happiest place you're ever going to work, or this is going to be the best job you're ever going to have. I think that those are false statements. I think you can never promise those things. I think I've been burned by them because I've worked places and I fucked up and did those things. So I'm probably overly cautious, and I just think it's wrong. You know, I don't want to make those promises, and I think you're just setting yourself up for disappointment, and you're lying to people. So if it were me, I wouldn't do that. You know, I think, you know, in Nolan, I mentioned this to you earlier this week, but like, I think Netflix, what they came out with their revised culture doc this week, I think they did a really nice job of this. They didn't make a ton of promises, but they put out some statements that I thought were really strong statements of what they aspire to be. Right. And I kind of pulled it up here of like the dream team. We aim only to have high performers at Netflix, people who are great at what they do and even better at working together. Doesn't promise that we are all the, you know, like we're the best, but we aim to do that. Right. Which means that they're going to have to figure out a way to solve for that. That they have, you know, great and always better. We often say Netflix sucks today compared to where we can be tomorrow. I love that too. You know, we need humility to understand what could be better. Like, I think it's the humility. Like that's what I think that you love about that. So like, you know, when you were sending me hate messages this week around meritocracy, you had mentioned this, and I agree. Like, I actually think that this is really well written. And so for the audience, it's jobs.netflix.com/culture. This is probably, I think, their 5th or 6th iteration that I've seen of the culture deck from OG Patti McCord to where it is today, which says like a lot to me. It says like, hey, we are going to continue to update this thing because it's always imperfect, as are humans. But there's one line in this, Colleen, that I think really stood out to me that I think is, you know, Netflix is a place that isn't really thought of as like this warm, cuddly place. No. And I'm seeing a lot of people now who I think are probably opposed to the way that Netflix actually runs performance, saying like, I really love this document. I think it's this one line. It says, while we don't always live up to these principles, most people who join Netflix are pleasantly surprised by how great their colleagues are and the way we empower people at every level. And I think that just that one line at the beginning, while we don't always live up to these principles, it humanizes this process that says like, we are going to get it wrong. Everyone gets it wrong. And I think what bothers people is this notion that like, well, this is the way it is and it's always this way, because we've all been in these rooms to when somebody has bent the rules to their favor, to where somebody's opened the back door and let somebody in.
And that's where I think everyone gets worked up over meritocracy. And that's where I think Netflix nailed it. David, what do you think?
Hey everyone, we'll be right back in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Your workforce is both your organization's greatest strength and largest single cost. With Planful, it's easy to unlock the secrets of successful workforce planning so you and your HR team can make the right business decisions. Imagine using data-driven insights to develop accurate forecasts, close hiring gaps, and adjust talent acquisition plans collaboratively based on costs today and into the future. Planful lets you collaborate with colleagues in finance to understand the value your employees bring to the table. And the best part, you can get started with Planful in just weeks with minimal help from IT. Plus, with Planful, you get an endless runway. Planful grows with you, no matter how fast or large your team scales. Ready to transform your HR strategy? Join over 1,500 organizations worldwide who trust Planful as their go-to workforce planning software at planful.com/heretics.
Here's a crazy stat. Between hybrid and frontline employees, about 80% don't typically work in an office. So it's no surprise that digitally engaging employees is the number one concern for CEOs as companies go hybrid. But as hybrid is quickly becoming the norm, it's easy for workplaces to start feeling a little less human. Yet delighting a digital workforce is possible, and it can even be, dare we say, fun. That's where Workvivo, Zoom's employee experience platform, comes in. If you've ever recoiled at the thought of a static intranet that looks like something you built in 1995 using MS Paint, have no fear. Workvivo is a dynamic, intuitive, accessible, and mobile-first tool. People actually like using it, which is why companies like Ryanair, Dollar General, Virgin, and more have rolled it out to hundreds of thousands of employees. Workvivo's activity feeds, spaces, shoutouts, and live streams, among other features, help elevate the employee experience like never before. The result? Dramatically better retention, productivity, and most importantly, connectedness. A greater sense of the belonging we all crave at work, whether we sit at a desk or drive a truck. Make Workvivo the digital heart of your organization and achieve limitless human connection. Head to workvivo.com to book a demo and make sure you tell them that Nolan and Kelly from HR Heretics sent you.
Yeah, I think the documentation of rules part of this, meritocracy and DEI, I think that's where they're maybe joined at the hip as well, because where, like to Colleen's point, where this becomes real is where you put it into practice. And if everything is left for, a biased interpretation, then we can't really live up to the ideals of either. And so you have to start documenting, how do promotions work? What do we mean by performance? What does it mean to exceed expectations? And so, putting that out there, then you have the pressure to actually live up to it. And when we don't, did we disclose? We talk about, hey, we didn't live up to this ideal and we're going to make that transparent. I think that's really where this stuff becomes real. On Netflix's the code of their culture code. They're a pretty diverse company in terms of almost half the company is female. They've in terms of a hard charging company, so maybe they don't espouse meritocracy, but in terms of a results driven company, it seems seemingly that, and they're actually also making quite a bit of strides on diversity and documentation. How we work, defining how we work is really core to how they built the company.
Yeah.
I think I was going to say the other thing about, and, I'm sure there are a lot of other companies that, do this and think about it. The choice that you make as a leader in terms of making these statements and the ability to be open to giving context as to how you got here and why, I think is a huge deal. Like, I'm making these decisions. I'm making these statements. Here's how we got here. This is the framing for why we're thinking of doing these things is so important and so helpful. And then reiterating it over and over as you have new people come on. And then your willingness, both as the HR person, but also as a business leader. It's not just HR. Like, that's the other thing I always find. I mean, I give, Scale credit for being the CEO who's coming out with this versus making an HR person do it or those kinds of things. But if I think back to where I've been more successful in the HR seat at companies with these kinds of things is when I have given good context as to here's what was in front of us. These are the challenges we were facing. This is how we came up with these solutions. This is how we got here. And then this is what we're hoping to solve for. And then being open to the feedback and publicly open about that. Like I also, Nolan, I heard another one of your podcasts this week where you and I are very aligned on this. Like I hate anonymous baloney. So, like my last company was very much like I had the Ask Colleen Slack channel. And so, and you publicly had to put your name on it, but I was very open to suggestions and feedback. And then I would be able to give context back as to how we got there. And we would always, after every sort of, cycle we went through, when we would look at the various pay cycles and those kinds of things, like we'd go back and say like this many people saw pay change and this is what we're seeing in market and we're very open and this is how we're going to change moving forward. Like we would tell people like we saw this didn't work for people. So people would know that we were actually iterating just like we iterated on our products, that everything wasn't stagnant, that this wasn't forever. And I think that the combination of the context and then the continual iteration to make things better, that we would hear from people that if things weren't working or if there was a perception problem, that we were at least attuned to it versus like in a black box somewhere, completely tone deaf. Like, I think that goes a long way.
Hey everyone, we'll be right back in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Real talk, most talent leaders haven't yet cracked how to leverage AI for meaningful impact on their hiring processes and business goals. But the leaders who are effectively using AI to transform their recruiting team's efficiency and quality use Metaview. Metaview is the AI assistant for the interview process. Their AI records and transcribes hiring conversations, like intakes, interviews, and debriefs, then provides perfectly summarized notes of everything that was discussed. That means your people can focus on creating human connections with candidates during calls and save time on the busy work of cleaning up notes after every interview. But it's so much more than just a time saver, because perfect notes means perfect data. For every candidate and every pipeline, hiring teams can make confident, informed decisions, and talent leaders can finally take control of the interview process. Join forward-thinking talent leaders at high-performing organizations like Brex, HelloFresh, and Quora, and check out Metaview. Head over to metaview.ai/heretics to talk to one of Metaview's product experts, or get started for free. You'll be up, running, and AI-enabled in minutes.
This episode is brought to you by Warp. If you're a founder with employees in multiple states, you know managing state tax compliance is complicated. Warp not only automates state tax compliance, but also offers a user-friendly experience tailored to the needs of startups with a robust in-house team of experts. Warp ensures your startup remains compliant across all 50 states, giving you the peace of mind you need to focus on scaling your business. They also make it easy for startups to provide health benefits for employees, hire international contractors, and even claim R&D tax credits. Hundreds of startups trust Warp to handle their payroll and compliance needs. You can go from zero to payroll live in just 2 days. Don't let payroll and compliance hold your startup back. Visit joinwarp.com/peel or tap the link in the description. Get started and receive a $1,000 gift card when you run your very first payroll. That's joinwarp.com/peel.
Accepting imperfections and calling them out and then trying to iterate and make them better, I think brings everybody to the table in a way that just makes us relatable. Like it just makes it way more human. And I love that approach. And that's candidly a mistake I made in my career, is like I tried to have everything be perfect, and it's not even aspiration. Like it's impossible. David, I want to quickly talk about going back to your Gemini comment around DEI and meritocracy. Are they at odds? And I think in the best version of themselves, they are not. And I think that's what your point is, and that's where I think it's like it's really well said. And I think that should be the aspiration. Is like that's where we should be shooting.
Yeah.
I will say though that I'm starting to get uncomfortable when we are looking at race and gender with these numbers that we've had attached to them for the last 10 to 15 years and putting out these reports. And the reason why is because of when DEI is not at its best. And I have personally been involved in conversations. I have personally talked to many exec recruiters that have said like, well, we can only hire and insert a mutable trait like gender or race in this role. And that's where I think this post came from Alex, is that sort of pressure. Like whether it comes from like his employee base, whether that comes from his board, whether it comes from outsiders in the company being like, well, why isn't this number higher? And that has been my experience of where DEI hasn't gone wrong. And so I think about this as like a pendulum. Mm-hmm. And right now, with the world and the macro environment being the way that it is, everyone's throwing DEI out. I don't think that that's the future. But I also don't think the future is what we've been trying for the last 10 years. And that's why you're seeing these sorts of responses from company leaders as they remove DEI teams, as they come out with policies like MEI, like what Scale is doing, is because we're looking at these immutable traits. And so, I'm going to go back to what I said earlier, which is I don't think I should just be able to say like, hey, this isn't working. Do you think we can measure the success of diversity, of DEI specifically, without looking at those numbers? Because that's the thing that I'm looking at that provides me a little bit of uncomfort as I think about where the future goes.
Yeah, I mean, representation and the sort of deflating feeling that a lot of DEI professionals have when they release numbers and they look at representation, or the focus on representation, we haven't moved much, it is real. And I think it takes up a lot of airtime when we talk about, is DEI, is it working when we can't move these numbers, particularly in monolithic companies? There's obviously political aspects that sort of seep into. When I think about DEI, I'm thinking about it as a company leader. There's societal aspects of DEI as well that can like live on the periphery or sort of come into the company. And I think maybe that's why Brian said, hey, we got to take it outside, like is effectively the policy that he put in place, years back. When I was at Niantic, I'll just tell a quick story, makers of Pokemon Go, our marketing messaging would put out tweets to our audience in Latin America to say, hey, the intent was to say, hey, there's an event coming up this weekend, but they were using the wrong tense. And so it said the event was last weekend. And we're like, why is no one showing up to our events? We don't have any Spanish speaking people in our marketing and product team. This is a problem. It was like the genesis for we need to get serious about diversity, because we were seeing directly in our business, we need to reach a wider audience. We have clear gaps. And so that was the genesis of our DEI. And we brought in a terrific individual named Trinidad who led these efforts. Now, at the same time, what she was dealing with conversations about Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Brett Kavanaugh and Donald Trump at the time. And like, this is what DEI is about. This is about fighting societal injustice. Like, hold on, we're makers of Pokemon Go. We're trying to make a video game. And I remember having a conversation there with someone who pulled me aside and says, I am militant about this stuff. Use the word militant. I'm like, we're making a video game. We're trying to reach people in Latin America. And so Trinidad was in the middle of that. She was dealing with these forces of like, no, this is a societal thing. We need to confront white males. And well, hold on, we're trying to do this over here. She kind of zigged this way when people were expecting her to zig this way. And what she did was she said, I'm going to try and help us reach Black game developers. And so she did this terrific thing that actually focused on the business in a way that we didn't anticipate, that made it tangible. When we released our diversity report, talked about reaching Black game developers, reaching a new audience, reaching a new population that we didn't previously reach, and also reaching a much more diverse customer base. And so we're bringing it back to the customer, and so representation is important. Our customers want to make sure the game works. They want to make sure the messaging works. They want to make sure that like you're not speaking in the wrong tense and I'm showing up to an event that isn't. So bringing it back to the customer has been where I've seen it work really well, and celebrate it, and actually brings people together, as opposed to like, we're going to use this to sort of confront each other and divide the company.
Yeah, that point on focusing on the customer, I love. And then the other point that I love is unity versus division. And that's, for better or worse, like what I love about what Coinbase has done and what I love about what Scale has done, they picked a path and they've said like, hey, if you want to be on this journey going in this direction, this is what we're doing. And so you can vote with your feet. Colleen, you and I have had this discussion many, many times. And I think it does drive unity, even though it's coming at it from what feels like maybe an orthogonal angle. Colleen, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I have sort of 2 points. One is I always love when you have any of these conversations about, I don't care if it's diversity or who you hire or, sort of college hires versus senior hires or whatever. It's like, what's going to drive the business forward is really all that matters at the end of the day. Like, that's what we're here for. That's what the paycheck is for. That's all that matters. We don't have jobs otherwise if it's not about the business and our customers. So that's what we should be focusing on. And so the people who come in should be people who are motivated by what we're doing and what that place is about. And so I think anytime you can frame that conversation for people and refocus them on that, I think it's helpful. So number one, I think you're going to get violent agreement there. Number two is I do think that some of this conversation is a bit of a backlash from people who were frustrated and, potentially over the years felt like they didn't have a voice or they were scared to voice, potentially not feeling included in some of the DE&I conversations, or they were excluded and, or they didn't like what was happening. And I think if you were someone who was, a manager who was asked to change a rating for some of your employees so that, because, hey, we need more women to get a higher rating and you need to take somebody down and you were asked to do that, or I want you to go hire just this X person and they need to look like that. And I don't care what the rest of the candidates, which are all practices that we have heard. Those are not practices that I personally, when I was ahead of people, pushed on, but I have seen them at companies I have worked at and been a part of. And I know that they have been frustrating, or you have felt like you were excluded in some of these conversations that now you may feel like this, hey, well, socially it's acceptable to go out and say these other things. And I don't necessarily know if that's the right answer either. So it doesn't feel very inclusive on the other side. I do think numbers are important, frankly. Like, I think it is a measurement. Now, whether or not that is the measurement that matters, or that is a measurement that you spend a lot of time on, like there are going to be measurements that you are required by law to report, whether or not you have to move those numbers or you care to move those numbers, like that's up to you. And to your point, Nolan, like I think the more honest and transparent you are about how important that is to your business, the better. Like, to your note.
Exactly.
People can choose. If it's not important to your company, it's not going to be something that you are going to rally around, that's going to be a big focus for your company, then don't tell people it is. Like, just don't lie to them. So,
yeah.
And if it is, then tell people it is. So then those people can choose and opt into that culture. I think that's great. So one way or the other, just pick a lane and stick in the lane. And then if you change that lane, give people the options and treat them with respect and let them make choices like Coinbase did and some other companies did when they made those choices. And then they can decide how they want to operate. I do think there are companies where politics will matter and it will make it, like Coinbase is actually very interesting. Like, politics really do matter to their company right now. They have
Absolutely.
a PAC that is driving a lot of conversation in Washington. So they can't say that there's no politics in the office. It's just politics that are related to crypto, and the rest of the politics they don't want in their office right now. Right. Like, so, and I appreciate that that's probably, and that's my last company too. Like, there were conversations that mattered. We talked a lot about voting because voting drove the financial system and the decisions that were made in the financial system. So we definitely talked about those things and how do you drive voting, because that's important.
Yep.
But I think you have to be clear from the beginning through the time that people are with you as to what lane you operate in, and give people the choice as to, sort of who you are and what they're opting in or out of.
I think that's really well said, Colleen. We had a listener ping earlier this week, and she talked about these unwritten rules. And I've been thinking about that comment all week. And I think actually this is the thing that drives people crazy on both sides of this debate. And this is will be my call for unity on if you're team DEI or if you're team meritocracy. I think the thing that drives everybody fucking crazy are the unwritten rules. Is the things that we know we're probably not right. The things that we don't put on paper, but we're actually pushing behind the scenes. that's what everyone's so tired of in today's culture. Like, we want more transparency. And I think transparency, for me, you know, it's, what is the quote of sunlight is the best disinfectant. And we're going through a lot of that right now. It feels overly on the side of DEI. But to your point, for both of your points earlier, meritocracy has these warts as well. And so, you know, when we actually put the sunlight on each of these topics, we find warts. And so if you are a company leader today and you're thinking about what is the best path for us, all I can tell you is be transparent. That's what I've learned, is just be transparent. Be transparent about what's working. Be transparent about what's not working. Be transparent about your process. Be transparent about your imperfections. Because the more transparency that you provide, the less hypocritical you are. And that's where everyone's hackles rise on both of these issues, is when you're a hypocrite and we know it, but we're not allowed to talk about it because it's the secret thing that happened in the back room. That's where you drive people insane. So I just want to say thank you both for another one of these like difficult conversations to crack into. I know they're a little bit uncomfortable at times, but just as friends, I sincerely appreciate your authenticity and your vulnerability to get into these topics. And Colleen and David, this is why we love having you on. And I think our listeners are going to love this episode. All right. Thanks, guys. Leave comments. Let us know what you guys think. Let us know what you want to talk about next. Thanks so much. HR Heretics is a podcast from Turpentine, the network behind Econ 102, Moment of Zen, and Turpentine VC. Subscribe, 5 stars, share it on Apple, YouTube, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcasts, all the things.